Foreign Minister stresses the need for an immediate nationwide ceasefire in Yemen and resumption of the political process as to end suffering of Yemenis. Houthi militia continues their human rights violations against Yemeni women amid local and international condemnations. Houthi rebels renew bombarding populated areas in Hodeidah, causing panic and fear among civilians. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Roshan Fouad. The Dutch government stresses the need for an immediate ceasefire and resumption of the political talks to end the conflict that caused the worst humanitarian crisis in recent time. This comes during the meeting of Sigrid Kaag, the Dutch foreign minister, with the Yemeni counterpart, where she showed total support for peace efforts which can end the suffering of millions of Yemenis. Further, the Dutch minister expressed her country's deep concern about the risks posed by the floating Safer oil tanker and called for an immediate interference to avoid a possible catastrophe in the Red Sea. Kaag showed the Dutch government's readiness to collaborate and provide further support in this issue. Since Houthi rebels seized the capital Sana'a in 2015, human rights violations acts have been committed on a daily basis. This received local, regional, and international condemnation. These violations reached their climax with targeting women. This report has more on some of the recent Houthi militia violations that targeted women in the capital Sana'a.
Since the Houthi militia seized the Yemeni capital Sana'a in 2015, they turned the entire country into a collective prison. This primitive group not only killed thousands of innocent civilians, but also the social structure of the Yemeni community. Women, fragile humans in a hugely conservative society, did not escape the sophisticating wheel of this backward militia. In an unprecedented step against women, the Houthi militia has informed the owners of commercial centers and pharmacies of the necessity of laying off female workers to prevent mixing and behavior contrary to the Houthi identity. Another incident of this militia violating the rights of women took place last week when the Houthi militia raided dolls displaying women's clothing in Sana'a, claiming that they were attractive idols, and imposed restrictions on the fashion of university students and transformed girls' schools into private schools for boys. The bullying of Houthis against women did not stop with that. Recently, extremist militia elements attacked billboards related to the wedding and beauty sectors, such as wedding halls and women's hairdressing salons, and blackened the faces of the pictures on the banners. Human rights reports indicate that there is a large percentage of small businesses led by women have been suspended for violating the militia's new religious identity, which has recently been imposed. In recent years, it has prevented females from working in public parks and has practiced violations of workers in humanitarian and development institutions, and incited violence against them in mosques as they claim they are soft, intelligent tools. The partial ban on women from work drew angry reactions in Yemeni society, and activists considered them to be more terrifying films than what ISIS did in Iraq and Syria, in crimes of terrorism invisible to the world. Activists on social media said that not allowing women to work in private facilities is black terrorism. The Houthi militia violations against women's rights seems to continue as far as they grip on power. For how long would this last? It's hard to tell. Shaza Abdelbaei, Yemen Today.
Moving to Hodeidah, joint forces managed to resolve violent clashes against the Houthi militia in Hais. A military source said that joint forces clashed with elements of the Houthi militia who tried to infiltrate the front lines but in vain. The sources added various medium and heavy weapons were used in the clashes. The fighting lasted about an hour and the Houthi militia suffered heavy losses in equipment and lives. Houthi militia renewed targeting El Jabariya in El Tuhaita as part of its flagrant violations of the UN truce. Local sources reported that the militia shelled heavily residential villages in the town. The sources added that dozens of shells fell near citizen homes and on farms, while others targeted roads used by residents. Further, the sources indicated that the militia militants opened fires from their medium weapons and snipers towards the populated areas and caused a state of panic among civilians. It is noteworthy that Houthi militia committed thousands of violations as part of its continuous escalation to fail the UN truce and block the peace agreement in Hodeidah. Houthi deadly mines continue to sweep lives of innocent civilians. Recent reports show that Houthis have planted around 1 million landmines in conflict areas and even in areas that are under their control. This report has more on the issue.
Human rights reports indicate that there are more than 2 million landmines planted by the Houthis in more than 15 Yemeni governorates, turning it into the most mined nation since World War II. According to statistics published by the Yemeni Observatory on Landmines, devices planted by Houthis in Taiz alone had killed and injured more than 3,000 civilians since 2015. Data from the Yemeni Coalition to Monitor Human Rights Violations, also known as the Rusd Coalition, showed that nearly 2,000 civilians, including 357 children and 146 women, have been killed in the past 6 years, and more than 2,000 civilians, including 519 children and 167 women, were disabled due to landmines. State news agency Saba reported that a Yemeni official has called on the international community to pressure the Houthi to stop planting landmines, which have so far killed more than 8,000 people. Director of the National Mine Action Program, Amin Al-Aqili, said that 61 members of his crew have lost their lives and a large number of others have sustained wounds due to the mines. Priyanka Mutaparthi, acting director of the emergencies program at the organization, said that landmines planted by the Houthis haven't only killed and maimed many civilians, but have also prevented vulnerable Yemenis from harvesting crops and bringing in the clean water they desperately need to survive. Mines have also prevented aid organizations from bringing food and health care to increasingly hungry and sick Yemeni civilians. According to the report done by Human Rights Watch, landmines prevented humanitarian organizations from reaching communities in need along western coast, including villages and towns in the districts of Al-Tuhaita and Mawza, as well as the main port city of Al-Hodeidah. And finally, how many civilians or children have to lose their life each day before this disaster can end? And how can they be saved while all types of aids are being prevented?
Coming next. Subjecting the Houthi movement to close scrutiny.
ثالثتي على منطقة الروضة استهدف الأطفال الأبرياء اللي يلعبوا في الشارع. بيدعي للسلام يقولوا للسلام يقتل أطفالنا يقتل أطفالنا الأبرياء.
أنا قلت افتجعت ولا قلنا يقع واحد صاروخ ثاني طلعت البيت حقنا. عشان أنا ألعب أنا وأصحابي والصاروخ الطرح.
Welcome back. Civil servants of the Ministry of Justice in Aden staged a protest to demand their salaries that were halted for 1 whole year. This comes in the context of large-scale protests conducted by employees of other public sectors which demand the government to pay their salaries on a regular basis. More of this story is in the following report.
Employees of the Ministry of Justice protest against payroll cuts. It is not the first time, as this protest was preceded by several protests demanding salaries payment. The government ignorance continue as it is unable to secure payrolls for employees in areas under its control in light with the incredible high prices, especially with the collapse of the national currency.
We, the judiciary employees, are suffering. We haven't received our salaries for more than 2.5 years. We demand the release of our payrolls. The public servant wakes up and goes to work daily, despite high prices and lack of salaries.
More than 1,400 employees in the judicial corps and deliberated governorate have not received their salaries for about a year, despite being disciplined to their duties and work hours. According to the judicial employees, the Judicial Council has done nothing to give them their rights.
The protest of the newly hired employees is the right, as they have been for more than a year without payrolls. We know that Judicial Council has funds to solve issues including employees' payrolls. We call on the President and the Judicial Council to urgently intervene and pay the salaries of our colleagues.
A whole year has passed since the deprivation of these employees of their rights, while the facilities in the Judicial Council suffer from the loss of employment due to the interruption of salaries and the inability of the Ministry of Justice to provide payrolls.
We demand our rights from the Judicial Council. We appeal to the Minister of Justice to pay attention to our problems. We, the newly hired employees, have been without salaries for more than a year. Employees have families to support, but without salaries, we cannot fulfill our obligations.
It is clear from these protests that the situation of judges and the judiciary system in the liberated areas will not be in better condition than their counterparts in the Houthi militia-controlled areas. If the government does not come up with immediate actions to address this problem, judicial employees, like other state employees, have been deprived from their payrolls for more than 5 years.
Teachers in Atak City and Shabwa staged a protest against the corruption of authorities and hard life conditions. The teachers protested in front of the local authority office and stressed the need to respond to their demands and end the injustice against their families. They renewed a call for increasing wages, especially in light of the collapse of the local currency. The Houthi militia established a number of checkpoints in the streets of Sana'a. Security sources confirm the Houthi militia has established a number of checkpoints inside the capital and its entrances. According to the sources, elements of the so-called Houthi preventive security have been deployed in intensive numbers at the entrance points to the capital and on all the roads between Sana'a and Ma'rib. The sources pointed out that the militia members are inspecting passing cars, interrogating travelers, and searching their phones, along with all their belongings. Media sources documented that Houthi rebels buried 246 of their militants during August. According to these sources, a number of 137 Houthi commanders were among those who were buried. The Iran-backed Houthi militia declared their war on Yemenis and the region on the basis of religious background that they have been given what they call as the divine right to rule the country and perhaps the world. The following report attempts to scrutinize with more depth the nature and the start of this terrorist movement in Yemen.
Their dream is imposed on everyone in Yemen. The Houthi rebels are trying to revive back the rule upon people. For that end, they subject the whole country to a ruthless war that devours Yemen. The Houthis have their own way of thinking that is related to ultra-dogmatic beliefs, which center on the claim that they are related to the family of the Prophet Muhammad. From this particular point, all the conflict in Yemen can be summarized. In the early 90s of the past century, the seeds of the group became clear. They formed the movements that was so-called الشباب المؤمن, or the believing youth. This group voiced complaints of a claimed marginalization in which Zaidi people in Yemen were living in. Zaidi people are those who claim that their family tree extends back to one of the Prophet's grandson. Their dogmatic thinking can be said to be a Shiite one, but in a simpler form. Their slogans were political. The Yemeni state then was flexible in dealing with them. Their leader Hussein Badruddin al-Houthi was a parliamentarian in 1993. After 2001 attacks in the United States and the American occupation of Afghanistan and Iraq, a Shabab al-Mu'min movement began to grow. The movement had new rule, a politicized one. Their opposition to the rule of late President Ali Abdullah Saleh was clear. The political agenda of the Houthis turned into an armed one in 2004, the same year during which their leader Hussein al-Houthi was killed. Abdul Malik al-Houthi, his younger brother, took the helm of the rebellion, and the movement named itself Ansarullah, or the supporters of God. Through 6 years up to 2010, the Houthis engaged in wars with late leader Saleh's government. The chance came to their doorstep when revolutionary protesters marched during the Arab Spring. In 2014, Houthis drove their way to the capital Sana'a and controlled the state's institutions. They are now moving on to capture the strategic governorate of Ma'rib to ensure their dominance of the entire country. However, by heroes of Yemeni resistance, Houthis are kept out, and the dream of the thriving Yemen is still in the horizon.
During a UN ministerial conference on environment in Geneva, Yemeni Minister of Water and Environment said safer oil tanker poses a threat on Yemen and the neighboring countries. The National Committee Against Coronavirus announced the registration of 39 new cases of the epidemic in 8 governorates. Committee officials said on Twitter that 10 cases were recorded in Hadramaut, 8 in Al-Bayda, 8 in Ma'rib, 5 in Aden, 5 in Al-Dala, 1 in Taiz, 1 in Shabwa, and 1 in Mahra. Also 4 deaths were documented, plus 35 recovered cases. With the current updates, the total confirmed cases are 1,181, including 1,534 deaths and 5,051 cases of recovery. Here's a reminder of the main headlines. Dutch Foreign Minister stresses the need for an immediate nationwide ceasefire in Yemen and resumption the political process as to end suffering of Yemenis. Houthi militia continues their human rights violations against Yemeni women amid local and international condemnations. Houthi rebels renew bombarding populated areas in Hodeidah, causing panic and fear among civilians. This is the end of the news. It was Roshan Fouad. See you soon.